There is a monthly allowance of 200. Ordinary elders receive thousands each month. The personal disciples receive at least 10,000 spiritual stones monthly. Why does Guzu receive so little? This, faced with Nan Chiao's questioning, Elder Chen looked at the Sect Master Guzu seated at the main seat, then lowered his head to the ground, mumbling without a coherent response. Guzu frowned and pressed. What's going on here? Why are you looking at me? Even though Guzu is a cripple, he is still a personal disciple. Isn't this meager stipend due to your embezzlement? Elder Chen immediately knelt on the ground in fear. 2 years ago, Uncle Gu was punished by you, Sect Master, for damaging the spiritual stones and had his allowance halved. Even with the halved allowance, how could it be only 10 spiritual stones? Nan Chiao frowned. This, Elder Chen glanced again at Guzu, hesitated for a moment, and then said, 3 years ago when Uncle Gu first returned to the sect, the stewards did not recognize him, seeing him clean the main hall every day. And without any cultivation, they classified him as a miscellaneous disciple. According to the rule, miscellaneous disciples receive 20 spiritual stones a month. Halved, that makes exactly 10 spiritual stones. Such a big matter. Didn't you think to ask? Nan Chiao gritted his teeth. Elder Chen looked at Guzu again and said softly, at that time, I reported this matter to the Sect Master. Senior Uncle Lu Dangyao was also present. She said that Uncle Gu was merely a miscellaneous disciple. At that time, the Sect Master did not refute it. So? What? Nan Chiao instantly flew into a rage. And after that, in 3 years' time, did you not learn Gushu's identity? Of course we did. But once the sect's allowances are set, changing them requires the Sect Master's order. At that time, the Sect Master said Guzu was just a cripple, and there was no need to waste too many spiritual stones, saying it was good enough, and no need to change anything specifically. What? Nan Chiao could no longer hold back. His gaze towards his master now cold. Great Master, Guzu is your personal disciple, and a hero of the sect. How can you treat him like this? Aren't you afraid the disciples of the sect will be disheartened? Being questioned like this by his own disciple, Guzu was naturally displeased, and coldly said, Guzu is just a cripple without cultivation. Moreover, his injuries are irreversible. Not wasting the sect's resources on him, doesn't that show he has some self-awareness? The sect can shelter him and give him a place to stay, which is already more than what others could hope for. Nan Chiao was stunned, gritting his teeth as he questioned, what about his hero status in the sect? 500 years ago, Uncle Gu ventured into the Forbidden Land. For the sake of the sect, for the sect's blessing. Do you even know if this blessing you speak of really exists? Can you explain it clearly? Guzu frowned. Of course it exists. Since Guzu entered the Forbidden Land, the sect's blessing has been continuously gathering. The subsequent prosperity of the sect is the best proof. Master, do you still not acknowledge it? I actually think this has nothing to do with the so-called blessing. Master, Nan Chiao was completely stunned. Do you not even trust me, your disciple? Chiao, of course I trust your words. You have divined the path for the sect more than once, but the matter of the blessing is too intangible. To this day, no one can prove it. The so-called blessing has always been an extremely mysterious and elusive thing. Even the great cultivators cannot be sure what this blessing is. No one can explain how it comes and goes. Seeing that Guzu still doubted the existence of the blessing, Nan Chiao felt speechless. After hesitating for a moment, he still said, Master, I cannot convince you about the existence of the blessing, but I want to remind you of one thing. When Uncle Gu left the Qingshuan Holy Land, the blessing that had been there for 500 years began to dissipate. Guzu clearly didn't take it seriously. Since you say the blessing has dissipated, then let's see what happens next. After this blessing has dissipated, What happens to the Qingchuan Holy Land next? I would also like to see what this so-called blessing truly is. Master. The blessing endures, accumulating the sect's fortune over time. But if the blessing dissipates, the sect will face continuous disasters. This is not a joke to be taken lightly, Nan Chiao reminded. I should never have let you cultivate the art of divination. Guanzilin said, ignoring Nan Chiao's earnest warning. Instead, she shook her head. Cultivators go against the natural order. Relying entirely on the so-called blessing is like chasing a mirage. You must believe that man can conquer nature. Nan Chiao wanted to say more, but in the end, she shook her head. Disciple takes her leave. She understood that her master was not willing to listen to her at all now. Continuing to argue would be pointless. She left the sect hall in a daze, glanced at the sky, seeing the blessing still dissipating rapidly. At this rate, it won't be long before the blessing accumulated over 500 years completely vanishes. What should I do next? What should I do next? Meanwhile, in the Forbidden area of the Tianqi Mountains, Guzu, inside his cave dwelling, opened his eyes with joy. He had made a breakthrough. After spending a whole month, he had finally reached the 3rd level of refinement. His green bamboo rod could now be used. At this moment, Guzu sat cross-legged. The green bamboo rod lay horizontally in front of him. Gushu's hands formed a series of intricate seals. Spiritual energy began to flow through his meridians. In an instant, Gushu's eyes opened. A flash of brown light passed through his pupils. Command the vine, he whispered softly. His left hand continued forming seals, while his right hand placed 2 fingers on the bamboo rod. In an instant, a strange scene unfolded. The previously still bamboo rod trembled violently as soon as Gushu's 2 fingers touched it. At this moment, as Gushu's right hand cast the vine-controlling technique, his left hand quickly formed another seal. Spirit thread, a thin thread of spiritual energy, appeared in his left hand. He did not hesitate. Using both hands, he controlled the bamboo rod with his right hand, while wrapping the spirit thread around it with his left. Each wrap had a precise position. The bamboo rod flickered with a strange light. Struggling intensely, the spirit thread snapped repeatedly, but Guzu remained patient. Each time the thread broke, he started again from the beginning. A tug-of-war ensued between him and the bamboo rod. Finally, as Gushu's spiritual energy was nearly exhausted, the spirit thread finally wrapped around the entire length of the bamboo rod. Now, Guzu did not hesitate any longer. A drop of his essence blood fell on the 7-inch mark of the rod. In an instant, the bamboo rod's struggle began to weaken. Moments later, it became docile again. It's done, he muttered, recognizing the ritual of bonding through blood, transforming the bamboo into a rod. Guzu carefully inspected the bamboo rod, noticing it still appeared plain. Yet holding it, it gave an indescribable, profound feeling, fishing across the heavens. He murmured to himself, "Let me give it a try." Guzu whispered. With a flick of the bamboo rod, the thread immediately dangled down, its end seemingly vanishing into thin air. At first glance, it appeared as if Guzu was fishing out of nothing in the cave. As he waited, Guzu mumbled to himself, unsure if this method was correct, or if the bamboo rod required any bait. The use of the bamboo rod was something Guzu had observed as a bystander in an illusion. In the illusion, it was Zhongzhen who had taken this bamboo rod. 1,000 years later, ACCIDENTALLY discovering its proper use. Guzu wasn't entirely sure if he was doing it right, but as he worried, the bamboo rod suddenly dipped. Feeling just like when a fish bites the hook and pulls the rod, Gushu's eyes lit up. He lifted the rod. Surprised, unable to pull it up, a great force tugged from the other end of the rod, as if a large fish was struggling. Guzu didn't hurry, remaining calm. Instead, he began a tug-of-war with the fish. When the fish pulled hard, Guzu relaxed a bit. When the fish relaxed, Guzu pulled harder. In the blink of an eye, half an hour passed this way. After such a long struggle, the fish on the other end was clearly exhausted. Guzu seized the moment and yanked the rod with force. He could vaguely hear what seemed like an ancient god's roar of anger. However, as the rod was fully lifted, the roar was instantly cut off. Guzu looked at the end of the thread on the rod. There was an ancient book with a dark cover. A technique book. Guzu's eyes lit up. His Danshin of Chiao is now in need of various cultivation techniques. Without hesitation, Guzu immediately took the book into his hand, but after a careful look, Guzu suddenly froze, because on the dark cover, there were only for large characters. Tiashu Fu Lu. Is this real or fake? It can't be. This Tiashu book was said to have been lost 10,000 years ago. Guzu was incredulous. The path of talismans is one of the 6 paths in the cultivation world. A talisman master can create powerful talismans, each with unique uses. A powerful talisman master is known as a talismanist. It is said that top-tier talismanists can inscribe supreme power into the space of an inch. A single talisman can slaughter a city or destroy a country. Guzu couldn't help but click his tongue in amazement. This Tiashu talisman book is extremely powerful, but also very complex. This Tiashu talisman book is extremely powerful because the content of this book doesn't just teach how to write talismans, it even analyzes the fundamental essence of the path of talismans. Starting from the origin of all things in the world, the content is obscure and hard to understand, to the point of being astonishingly difficult. To fully understand and apply it would likely take a significant amount of time. Guzu sighed, feeling a bit regretful. In his current situation, he needed to cultivate quickly because his lifespan was running short. Only by advancing in his cultivation could he extend his life. He couldn't afford to spend a lot of time studying the path of talismans. Just as he was feeling regretful, Guzu suddenly remembered. My Wuwei ancient book. I wonder if it can transcribe this Tiashu talisman book. Guzu had already witnessed how powerful the ancient book in his Danshin of Chiao was. As long as he inscribed the cultivation techniques in it, not only could it advance the techniques, but it could also accelerate understanding. If he could transcribe this Tiashu talisman book, not only might the talisman book itself advance, but even a reduction in comprehension time would be quite beneficial. Thinking it over, he decided to act. Guzu immediately began to take action, focusing his mind on his Danshin of Chiao. He flipped open a page of the Wuwei ancient book and began to write with his mind. Guzu's thoughts were simple, regardless of whether it worked or not. He at least had to try. What Guzu didn't know was, as he transcribed the Tiashu talisman book word by word, a monumental change was occurring in the outside world. In the Qingshuan Holy Land, at Mashafeng, Qin Moden, the chief talisman master of Qingshuan Holy Land, was currently wearing her ink-colored long dress, explaining to a group of disciples below. The so-called path of talismans is to use the soul as a guide, to draw the Tao's resonance with heaven and earth, and inscribe the Taoist arts onto talisman paper. The Tao's resonance with heaven and earth is the power of the rules that inherently exist in the world. As talisman masters, we need to comprehend the Tao's resonance with heaven and earth and imprint it using various methods to unleash its infinite uses. To become a talisman master, one first needs to have a mastery in the art of calligraphy, then sufficient soul power, and finally a deep understanding and comprehension of the Tao's resonance with heaven and earth. Qingshuan Holy Land places great importance on the training of its disciples. As the chief talisman master of Qingshuan Holy Land, Qin Moden not only needs to create powerful talismans for the sect, but occasionally also teaches disciples the path of talismans. At this moment, Chinmoden was demonstrating the creation of a talisman to the disciples. With a single stroke, the talisman formed naturally. In an instant, the laws of heaven and earth surged. The Tao rhythms that had been drawn towards the talisman immediately began to merge with it. The moment of their fusion would mark the completion of the talisman. But just as the talisman was about to be completed, an unexpected change occurred. The Tao rhythm, which was about to be absorbed into the talisman, suddenly began to tremble violently. It then abruptly broke free from the talisman and leapt upwards. Instead of dispersing, it turned towards a specific direction. What's happening? Chinmo Ran was utterly baffled. What puzzled her even more was that it wasn't just this single Tao rhythm. On the contrary, in her perception, one after another, new Tao rhythms began to appear successively. Tao rhythms were spontaneously appearing. What is going on? Why are the Tao rhythms suddenly behaving so unusually? Chinmo Ran's eyes showed signs of panic, as the scene before her had exceeded her understanding. As more and more Tao rhythms appeared, these Tao rhythms suddenly all turned towards a specific direction, and then slightly bowed. It seemed as if these Tao rhythms were welcoming a revered old friend. This is the myriad rhythms paying homage. Chinmo Ran's eyes widened, and she couldn't help but tremble slightly. These Tao rhythms, hoping to be recorded by someone, and spontaneously appeared, releasing goodwill, being automatically attracted and worshipped. But how could such a thing happen? Could it be that an unparalleled genius has been born? A naturally supreme talisman master? Countless thoughts swirled wildly, throwing Chinmo Ran into complete confusion. She felt an inexplicable fear. Many people believe that talisman masters control the Tao rhythms of heaven and earth, but in reality, only those who have truly become talisman masters understand that talisman masters do not control the Tao rhythms. Rather, they cooperate with them. It is the talisman master who attracts the Tao rhythms, and then the Tao rhythms acknowledge the talisman master, willingly assisting them, helping them create talismans. Therefore, to evaluate the potential of a talisman master, the most important aspect is to see how well they resonate with the Tao rhythms of heaven and earth. Chinmo Ran had a strong talent and a high affinity with the Tao rhythms. Years of diligent cultivation had further enhanced her skills in talisman making. But even she did not possess the ability to make so many Tao rhythms resonate with such affinity, let alone achieve the myriad rhythms paying homage. There were many others who shared Chinmo Ran's thoughts. Myriad rhythms paying homage. It is the myriad rhythms paying homage. Investigate. Immediately find out what caused this. What terrifying existence has descended? This scene actually made me feel fear. If a person is causing all of this, then could this person be so powerful that I might not even be able to write talismans in the future? Incredible. If it is truly a person, how strong must their affinity be? On this day, countless talisman masters set aside their urgent tasks and stepped outside. They looked towards the east. All talisman masters understood that something monumental had happened. At this moment in Zhangzhou, beside the forbidden zone of the Immortal Burial Valley, in an ancient temple that had existed for who knows how many years, an elder who seemed to have been sitting in meditation for ages suddenly opened his eyes. He looked towards the east, as if trying to see through everything. Moments later, the elder burst into wild laughter. He's finally here. 3,000 years of waiting, and I, the old man, have finally waited for this. The fated one of the Mo Han Lu has appeared. Unaware of the changes outside, Guzu remained absorbed in transcribing the talisman scriptures from the celestial book. Though it was transcription, it was more about comprehension. The power of the nameless ancient book was not just a guide for advancement. It was not merely a fusion of techniques. It also had another function: to facilitate rapid understanding. This talisman scripture from the celestial book would normally take at least a year to grasp slightly. To fully comprehend it would take even longer, but with the help of the ancient book, every word Guzu wrote deepened his understanding of the Talisman scriptures from the celestial book. In just one day and one night, Guzu inscribed the final word. In an instant, the ancient book in his danshin chesi suddenly burst with radiance. Immediately, a few pages floated upwards, eventually forming a complete book that hovered beside him. However, the cover only had 2 words, Talisman Book. Guzu was somewhat astonished, because this Talisman Book, which was already more powerful than the Talisman scriptures from the celestial book, was even more formidable. After a brief glance, Guzu began to understand ordinary talisman techniques involve awakening the Tao rhythms of heaven and earth, collaborating with them to gain their assistance. However, the Talisman scriptures from the celestial book not only awaken the Tao rhythms, but also make them naturally harmonious, even willingly becoming an aid to the Talisman Master. There was also a deeper understanding of the Tao rhythms. But Guzu quickly shook his head and closed the Talisman book. It wasn't that the Talisman book wasn't powerful enough, but because its comprehension difficulty was much higher than that of the Talisman scriptures from the celestial book. Guzu had once stood at the peak. He knew very well that for cultivators, the most important thing is still oneself. Currently, he was too weak. At the 3rd level of refinement, he was just a beginner cultivator, trying to forcibly comprehend something as advanced as the Talisman book. It was simply impossible to achieve. The more he looked, the more disadvantageous it became for his current situation. Guzu glanced at the bamboo rod beside him, his eyes flashing with a bit of emotion. This bamboo rod was incredibly powerful. According to his observations in the illusion, Zhongzhen had used this bamboo rod many times, catching numerous heavenly materials and earthly treasures, spiritual stones and celestial medicines. But more often than not, he mostly caught useless junk. This time, Guzu himself didn't have high hopes. As long as he could catch some cultivation resources, he would be content. But unexpectedly, on his very first try, he managed to catch such a heavenly book. He wanted to continue fishing, but after trying, he found that the bamboo rod didn't activate any effects. Evidently, just like in the dream, the bamboo rod could only be used once every 10 days. Guzu didn't feel regretful. For a cultivator who might spend months in seclusion, 10 days felt like the blink of an eye. Putting aside his thoughts, Guzu began to pack his things. He was ready to leave. For the past month, he had been diligently cultivating, just to break through to the 3rd level of refining. Now that he had succeeded, he couldn't stay in this cave dwelling any longer. Not to mention that this place was close to Qingshuan Holy Land, where he could be discovered at any time. The spiritual energy here was too thin. This meant this place was not suitable for long-term residence. In the path of cultivation, the core is spiritual energy. In places with abundant spiritual energy, cultivation progresses much faster. This cave dwelling had extremely thin spiritual energy. For the past month, Guzu had been using the spiritual stones he had previously saved to assist in his cultivation. Now that the spiritual stones were exhausted, he could not stay here any longer. After restoring the cave dwelling to its original state, Guzu carefully stepped out of the cave. However, as soon as he stepped out, he couldn't help but frown. A streak of rainbow light flashed across the sky. Though it was just a fleeting glimpse, Guzu recognized that it was his former senior sister, Nan Chiao. Why would she be here? Guzu furrowed his brows. He didn't think Nan Chiao was looking for him. His impression of this senior sister wasn't very deep, because 500 years ago, Nan Chiao was very solitary, and they were not close. After 500 years, when he returned to the sect, they had even less interaction. Although he didn't understand why Nan Chiao was here, Guzu thought for a moment and then went back to the cave dwelling to rearrange it. Afterward, he carefully left through the forest, trying to avoid being seen by Nan Chiao to prevent any unnecessary trouble. This time, he had his own goal. Yangshao City. This city was far from Qingshuan Holy Land and was a city of rogue cultivators, not controlled by any faction. When Guzu left Qingshuan Holy Land, he had already decided to live as a rogue cultivator, not burdening himself with too much for the rest of his life, living only for himself. This place was indeed a good destination. Moreover, more importantly, if the illusion he had seen, spanning countless years, was accurate, Yangshao City would soon have a great opportunity. An opportunity that in the illusion ultimately became Zhangzhen's aid. But now as a rogue cultivator, Guzu wanted to compete for it. Half a day after Guzu left the cave, the place that had only seen Guzu enter for 500 years, in front of the cave that only Guzu had entered in the past 500 years, now welcomed its second person in 500 years. It was none other than Nan Chiao. 1 month had passed since Guzu left the sect, and Nan Chiao had been searching for Guzu for a month, although most of the time, she had been unconscious due to the backlash from her divination techniques. And even now, her injuries had not fully healed. But fortunately, after all this effort, she finally succeeded. At this moment, looking at the cave in front of her, Nan Chiao's eyes were filled with excitement. There were traces of a formation here. My divination was not wrong. Guzu did not go to Qingshuan City, but came here instead, confirming her thoughts. Nan Chiao took a deep breath, and instead of barging into the cave, she called out softly, "Little junior brother?" The cave was silent, with no response. Nan Chiao couldn't help but call out again, "Little junior brother, it's me, your senior sister Nan Chiao." The cave remained silent. "Senior sister has something to tell you. May I come in?" As she spoke, Nan Chiao's voice trembled slightly, but the desolate cave was utterly quiet, making Nan Chiao's heart tighten. Could something have happened to little junior brother? Thinking this, Nan Chiao finally couldn't delay any longer. She hurriedly rushed into the cave, but there was no sign of her little junior brother in the cave. In fact, the entire cave was covered in dust, with no trace of anyone having been there. How is this possible? This cave clearly bore the marks of her little junior brother. Moreover, her divination technique indicated that her little junior brother should be in this cave. Could the divination technique be wrong? Nan Chiao was incredulous. She had always been confident in her divination skills. But over the past month, every time she divined for Guzu, she encountered backlash. She couldn't help but start doubting if there was something wrong with her divination skills. No, that's not right. There's something wrong with this cave, although it's covered in dust. Why, after being abandoned for so long, are there no signs of snakes, insects, or rats? Moreover, there are signs that this formation has been activated recently. Suddenly, Nan Chiao made a discovery. Her eyes once again filled with joy. "It's my junior brother. My junior brother has always been cautious. He didn't want to be tracked, so he used a method before leaving. He is nearby." She had cultivated the divination technique, and to avoid harming others or herself, she rarely got close to people. But she had always understood Guzu fairly well. Her junior brother had always been careful and cautious even 500 years ago. It wasn't surprising that he would do something like this. Having confirmed her suspicion, Nan Chiao immediately began to search the cave carefully. As she searched, she indeed found something. In the corner of the cave, mixed with the dust, she found green powder. This is spiritual stone. Depleted spiritual stones. Nan Chiao was a bit surprised. Spiritual stones can be directly used for cultivation, and once their spiritual energy is fully absorbed, the stones will automatically shatter. This isn't unusual. What is truly strange is why the spiritual stones have shattered into this powdery form, usually when used to power magical tools or activate formations. Spiritual stones are quickly depleted of spiritual energy, and they break into pieces. However, when a cultivator uses them for cultivation, slowly absorbing the spiritual energy until the energy is fully depleted, they can indeed turn into this powdery form. Could it be that my junior brother's cultivation has recovered? He has started cultivating again. Little junior brother, I will find you. I will make it up to you. Nan Chiao made a decision and finally left the cave. She soared into the sky. He couldn't have left too long ago. Just as she was about to start tracking again, the sex token hanging at her waist suddenly buzzed. Nan Chiao frowned. Her master's urgent summons. She checked the message on the token. There was only one word. Return immediately. Nan Chiao hesitated for a moment, but finally sighed, looking at the endless Tianqi mountain range, and then turned towards Qingshuan Holy Land. Meanwhile, Guzu, who had stopped in a forest, suddenly sensed something. He looked back, but then he refocused his mind and frowned at what was in front of him. A one-eyed Volf demon was drooling, staring intently at Guzu. Seeing the Volf demon, Guzu couldn't help but frown. The Tianqi mountain range was teeming with fierce beasts. Encountering a demon beast on the way was normal. However, this was still the outer region, where the strength of ordinary demon beasts wasn't very high. But this Volf demon in front of him was exuding the aura of a second-tier demon beast. The cultivation levels of human cultivators are roughly divided into Cherifining, Foundation, Establishment, Golden Core, Nascent Soul, Divine Transformation, Void Refinement, and Mahayana. The cultivation methods of the demon race differ from those of humans. Their early-stage divisions also differ, but a second-tier demon beast already has strength comparable to the late stages of Cherifining. Judging by the aura this demon beast exudes, its strength is comparable to an 8th-layer Cherifining cultivator. However, facing the fierce gaze of this Volf demon, Guzu did not show fear. Instead, he shook his head and said softly, "Your cultivation is not easy, and you are of no use to me. I do not wish to kill you." Unfortunately, this Volf demon clearly had low intelligence. Its eyes flashed with a cold light, and it suddenly lunged at Guzu. Seeing this, Guzu shook his head and could only pull out a wooden stick he had picked up earlier. The aura of blood and slaughter from his 500 years of battles began to subtly emerge. Although his cultivation was only at the 3rd layer of Cherifining, 500 years of relentless battles had given him countless experiences. What of his second-tier demon beast? If it blocks the way, then it shall be slain. As the Volf demon was about to reach him, Guzu's aura suddenly withdrew entirely. The next moment, a red-tasseled spear flew in from afar, landing directly in front of the Volf demon. Had the Volf demon not sensed the danger and stopped in time, it would have been pinned to the ground by the spear. Guzu looked to the side and saw not far away a woman in a red battle robe appeared. Her face was extraordinarily beautiful, with a touch of heroism in her brows. The opponent, after throwing the long spear, swiftly charged forward. Almost at the moment Guzu saw her, she was already right in front of him. She raised her hand, and the red tassel spear, with a hum, leapt back into her hand. The woman grabbed the spear and swung her arm, placing the red tassel spear horizontally between Guzu and the Volf demon. After doing this, she nodded apologetically to Guzu and said softly, "Sorry, I was chasing this demon, but I didn't expect to drive it to the outskirts of this mountain range. Are you hurt, fellow cultivator?" Guzu shook his head, glancing at the jade token hanging from her waist. It was an extremely ancient and intricate identity token, with only 2 ancient characters inscribed on it. TSCE. While Guzu was sizing her up, the woman was also examining Guzu. However, she was more astonished by Guzu's white hair. But at that moment, Guzu suddenly spoke. "That Volf demon is about to attack." The woman turned her head, just in time to see The Wolf demon, having become extremely wary due to her arrival, had quietly accumulated power and suddenly unleashed a wind blade towards her. The wind blade was clearly the Wolf demon's full-strength attack. The woman was about to dodge, but remembering that Guzu was still beside her, she gritted her teeth and lifted her spear to block the wind blade head-on. She barely managed to block it, but when she turned around, she saw that Guzu had already moved to a position where the wind blade couldn't reach him. Was this a coincidence? While she was still in a daze, she heard Guzu remind her again. It's trying to escape. The woman turned her head, and indeed, the Wolf demon, seeing its wind blade sneak attack fail, had turned to flee. You escaped once. Do you think you can escape a second time? The woman snorted coldly and threw her spear instantly. Then her figure flashed, and she immediately appeared in front of the Wolf demon with just 3 moves. The Wolf demon fell to the ground with a crash. The woman instinctively turned to see Guzu's reaction, but he had already turned and left. In such a short time, he had already walked far away. What a strange person, Ye Hongling thought, feeling a bit intrigued. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to leave the spoils of war and follow him. My name is Ye Hongling, from the Tiasi mansion. May I know your name, fellow cultivator? Loose cultivator. Ye Hongling was a bit surprised. Guzu had faced the Wolf demon with such calmness, even appearing at ease. This didn't seem like the behavior of a mere loose cultivator. However, among cultivators, many had peculiar temperaments. So Ye Hongling didn't ask further. She simply said, the Wolf demon was disturbed by my pursuit, and thus troubled you. As an apology, I offer the Wolf demon's body to you. Guzu was somewhat surprised. However, in the end, he still shook his head. I appreciate your kindness, but this Wolf demon is of no use to me, since Miss Ye hunted it. It belongs to you. If there's nothing else, let's part ways here. Alright. Ye Hongling instinctively stepped back to make way. Guzu nodded slightly at her, then continued on his way. Ye Hongling was puzzled, deeply watching Guzu's back. She felt that this person was quite extraordinary. Even though his cultivation was only at the 3rd level of chair refinement, his demeanor was very unusual. Guzu, however, didn't think much of it. Noticing that Ye Hongling had retracted her gaze, Guzu immediately quickened his pace, moving swiftly through the forest. After running for several hours, ensuring no one was following him, Guzu finally relaxed a bit. It wasn't that he distrusted the renowned Tiasi mansion, but in such a remote wilderness, the most dangerous threats weren't always the powerful monsters. The most dangerous threat was people. As a loose cultivator, one must have the awareness of a loose cultivator. Trust no one, especially when one's own safety cannot be guaranteed. Maintaining vigilance is the safest course of action. Setting his direction, Guzu continued on his path, and as Guzu pressed on towards Yangshao City, back at Qingshuan Holy Land, Nan Chiao rushed back to the sect. Master, why did you summon me back in such haste? Is there something important? Chiao, you're finally back. You've been away from the sect for so many days. I was worried that something might have happened to you, Guanzulin said with concern. Thank you for your concern, Master, Nan Chiao replied, then immediately asked, Master, what is the matter? Please speak plainly. I am eager to return to the Tianchi Mountains to pursue Guzu. There is indeed an important matter that requires your assistance. Please, Master, tell me. Your junior brother has just emerged from the Sword Pavilion. After a month of training in the Sword Pavilion, he has made great progress in swordsmanship. I plan to give him a sword, and I hope you can use your divination skills to bless it. Upon hearing this, Nan Chiao was taken aback. Just for this? Is there a problem? Guanzulin asked, puzzled. A problem? Of course, there's a problem. To merely bless a sword, you used the Sect Master's urgent summon? Master, I recall that the Sect Master's urgent summon is only used for the most critical matters in the sect. You used it just for this? Nan Chiao's face darkened. Nan Chiao's face darkened. Guzu couldn't help but frown as well. Your junior brother is now the most important person in the sect, and the future of our Qingshuan Holy Land. Now that he has achieved something in swordsmanship, his sword must be chosen with utmost care. This matter is indeed of paramount importance to our sect. Nan Chiao took a deep breath, forcing down her anger. She wanted to loudly rebuke her master. You have another disciple who has left the sect and has been missing for a month. Aren't you at all worried about his safety? He was once the pride of the sect, once the future of the sect, and has contributed immensely to the sect. But in the end, she didn't say these words out loud, because she understood. In the eyes of her master, Guzu and Zhongzhen were worlds apart. Moreover, Zhongzhen was now indeed the focus of Qingshuan Holy Land's cultivation. She couldn't argue with Guanzulin's words. After a moment of silence, she could only softly agree. Disciple accepts the order. Where is the sword now? I can help enhance it for junior brother. No hurry! Your second junior sister is still refining it. It should be completed soon. It's not done yet? It's not that easy. Your junior brother's sword was made from countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures, gathered by me and your several junior sisters. Even though your second junior sister's weapon refining skills are advanced, it still requires a lot of time and effort. These words made Nan Chiao fall silent again. Return to your Wenshan pavilion for now. When your second junior sister finishes, I will call for you again. By the way, remember, you must not leave the sect. You should know better than I do that the enhancement of the magical weapon needs to be performed as soon as it's completed. If delayed, the effect will be much worse. Guanzulin instructed a few more sentences, then waved her hand to let Nan Chiao withdraw. Nan Chiao hesitated. She had an urgent matter. She wanted to find Guzu. She was on the verge of finding Guzu, but in the end, she could only sigh, bow, and leave the sect's main hall. My soul injury is still too severe. Meanwhile, in a cave in the forest, Guzu muttered to himself, his face pale. He looked extremely haggard at this moment. His robe soaked with sweat, and his aura was weak to the extreme. 500 years of battles in the Forbidden Land had left Guzu's soul with irreparable injuries. In the 3 years since his return, Guzu occasionally suffered from these injuries. The pain was unbearable. Each time, he could only grit his teeth and endure. Although the nameless ancient book had transformed into butterflies to heal his injuries, it only repaired his physical body. The soul injuries remained untreated. Fortunately, since leaving the sect, the injuries had only flared up twice in such a long time, unlike before in the peak, where they flared up every 3 to 5 days. My junior brother is truly remarkable. Guzu's soul injuries were difficult to heal.